So I will very quickly show a few applications, not always very industrially complex, because well, some of the models we are dealing with are confidential, so I cannot show everything. But I hope it will be interesting. Maybe a little bit about acoustic transparency first. Why I will speak about acoustic transparency? Maybe a historical reason. ACTRAN doesn't stand for Nastran. It doesn't, even though we were both by MSc Software. Doesn't stand for Fortran neither. Jean-Pierre Coët, who developed the initial version of the code, did it in Fortran, but it's not for that. It's for acoustic transparency. It's ACTRAN. So it was the main focus of the code in the early days. Now we do a lot of things, but we started with that. Acoustic transparency, it's a very often used test to characterize the one of the acoustic performance of panels or flat plates. It defines the ability of a component or screen to isolate volume from external noise sources. The typical test involves two-room test with a reverberant room providing the excitation, an echoic room approximating a free-field radiation condition, and measuring the power that cross the panel to be tested. To normalize this power, we use the transmission loss, which is the ratio between the power radiated by the plate divided by another power which would cross the same geometrical place occupied by the panel if it was in free field. It's a little bit complicated. I insist on that because people see power, transmission loss, and so on, so they are tempted to think in terms of power balance, and they are extremely surprised when they get a transmission loss that is negative. It's not a bug, or well, not necessarily. It's not energy creation, neither. It's just that the incident power is not the power that is really injected in your system. It's just a conventional power that would cross the same area in another system, which is just the free field. And so it's perfectly possible to radiate more power than this reference power, at least for finite size system. Okay. Typical measurement setup, I spoke about it already. There are various ways to do it. The rooms are more or less big. Sometimes they are huge, sometimes they are very small. But the typical system is built like that. Numerically, how we define things, we are very close to the experimental setup. We approximate the excitation within the reverberant room by a diffuse sound field, which is a superposition of plane waves which have equal probability for coming from any direction from the half space. Sometimes we add a silence cone angle here to prevent grazing waves to impact the panel. It's closer to what happened really in the reverberant room, but it's more complex in terms of field excitation. And the anechoic room is modeled as an infinite medium, usually a half space. Numerically, we can impose directly the diffuse sound field. It's just a superposition of plane wave excitation, which are distributed pressure and finite elements. The cost associated to finite element is the matrix inversion. This can be done one time, and you can solve for many excitation afterwards using this single factorization. So basically, getting the response for your system for one excitation or a lot of excitation is, well, additional excitation are not free, but they cost much less than the initial one. So it's not a problem to impose a diffuse sound field. And for radiation, when it's flat, we can use Rayleigh surface. It's nice because we don't have to mesh anything, and it's efficient. When it's not flat, then we are using infinite elements or PML. What we compute is typically the vibration level in each layer of interest. We can compute energy in each layer, energy stored, dissipated, make power balance very easily, just remembering that the injected power is not the incident power, so we have to be careful there. Transmission loss is computed directly. Can also do pressure field evaluation in the radiation room if we want to have more details about radiation process. Can compute radiation efficiency, acoustic power, and so on. We can, here the example is a windshield, but it can be basically anything containing solids, fluid layers, viscoelastic solids. In the frequency domain, it doesn't really matter if it's a viscoelastic or a classic solid. Porous materials and stacking of them with different boundary conditions without any issue. That's the advantage of finite elements. You don't have really issues associated to geometry or boundary condition for modeling. The issues are knowing the geometry and knowing the boundary condition, usually. Okay, this is a more typical example with porous materials with a damping layer between a heavy layer and the parts that has to be either insulated or whose transparency has to be improved. This is the example of the power balance, but I will not go into details. You have seen this more extensively in the previous example. Validation, well, some measurements versus Actron for a very simple panel, the ones you have seen here. Well, simple. It's not so simple. It's not flat, but it's not very complex either. We have a nice validation for the still only, which is usually what we start with, just to be sure that the modal behavior at low frequency is well captured. We don't have any issues about boundary conditions or material characterization or geometry. And then we start with additional treatments, trim panel containing the porous material and additional layers. And as you see, well, most of the modal behavior has vanished except at very, very low frequency. This was for the vibration, but obviously we can also do the sound pressure level in a cavity behind the panel if we want to do some noise reduction, or compute the radiated power and the transmission loss if we are doing acoustic transparency. Some validation. Power balance, well, you've seen that before. I will not go more into details. But it's something that when we do project at FFT, we do quite systematically, because it's a nice illustration of what happened within the materials. And for porous materials, it's not so easy. For classic solid materials, you just have a loss factor, and knowing the vibration level usually gives you a very good estimate about how the energy is dissipated. For porous materials, it's more difficult, so it's interesting to have the porous, and we can even distinguish between the different types of dissipations, thermal, viscous, and so on. How such projects help engineering? But basically, we can gain insight about what happened within the material that are very difficult to gain from experiments. And we can also obviously play with geometry, thickness, properties of the materials in a way that is much more easy than prototypes. Sometimes we could also do something which is not necessarily physically possible with prototypes. like increasing stiffness above the maximum, the stiffer material available or stuff like that, just to gain insight about what is happening. This can be done obviously with analytical models much more efficiently usually, but the advantage here is that we can do also variation of geometry, which can be very complex, and in some cases it's important. Okay, we can also activate or deactivate some physical phenomena, like removing the air or stuff like that, which can be very difficult to do experimentally. So it's more flexible in a way than experimental measurements. It's cheaper usually, but obviously if we miss completely a phenomenon within the simulation, only a test will show that. So we cannot replace completely the test, we can just reduce the amount of tests needed. Some automotive applications, in more details, RTC3 test, it's very similar to acoustic transparency, except that the excitation is usually mechanical, and we are interested in the sound radiated in a cavity. Here is an example of a treatment with a geometrically complex heavy layer with different thicknesses. Well, it's not very complex, but it's not easy to take that into account within a patch model, because you will usually have discontinuities and details here will be lost. With finite element model, you just have to mesh it and you solve it. Another problem very similar to what Noureddin has shown yesterday is the curved panel problems. Finite elements obviously can do that also. We have experimental measurements. Curvature effect is well represented, obviously, because models is not different from a flat plate. We use exactly the same ingredients. And the cost compared to a flat plate is not really different, except that if we want to have a non-reflecting boundary condition, the Rayleigh integral method, impedance method, is not possible in this case. So it's either infinite elements or PML. Okay, I will skip the introduction and directly go to the results. More details about the RTC, another RTC3 test. So that's what I said. The excitation is done mechanically on the perimeter of the tested panel, and the panel is treated and usually radiate either in free field or in a closed box. If it radiates in free field, the indicator for acoustic performance will be the radiated acoustic power. And if it radiates in a closed box, we will check the mean square pressure in this box. Those results, acceleration, so it's also important to check the vibration of the plate, of the heavy layer, of the bottom plate, and then we have the acoustic results. The sound pressure level in the cavity, or at 1 meter for free field radiation. Comparison between simulation and measurements. Measurements and simulation agree well, but you see significant mismatch. This is to be expected because this happened already. I don't have it here. On the untreated plate, usually it's because it's not always easy to know exactly about the boundary condition. And for flat plates, you have some issues when the plate is not exactly flat. That's the typical source of errors. Material properties also are important, but more for the porous material properties, not really for the steel panels. Some acoustic transparency example of a window. Again, you've seen this before. Maybe it's important to recall the effect of a panel on transparency. You have reflection effect, and you have a transmission and damping. So when you add porous material, you usually add damping and sometimes do some kind of insulation also, which increase reflection. Okay, more comparison, but I think you see the typical agreement we have between simulation and experiments. It's good, but it's not exceptional for typical measurements. And as I said, usually it has to do with uncertainties and variability. I don't have examples here, but there are some cases where we have experiment simulation agreement that are much better than that, which are really almost like comparison between two numerical methods. It's when people are really controlling extremely accurately properties of the material and geometry because they are interested in the sound production. So it's confidential, but typically loudspeaker simulation we do have much better agreement because people focus on sound production, not only insulation. So they don't, a rough estimation is not enough. They want to have a very accurate transfer function. Okay, another application is seal modeling. That's interesting because that shows how we can couple different finite element codes together. Seal, for example, in an automotive car application, automotive door application, sorry. Seals are rubber parts that are very flexible, that have a non-constrained shape, but that is not really useful because they behave in a constrained manner between when they are clamped between two steel parts, the frame and the door. And they are a source of noise, especially at higher frequency. Finite element can deal in this case with high frequency because if we approximate this with a 2D model, the model is very small, the seal is small, and it's 2D, so we can go to a very large number of degrees of freedom quickly and deal with small wave numbers. The idea is to couple two different finite element codes, one dealing with a non-linear structural deformation, abacus in this case, and then we retrieve the results of the squeeze deformation of the seal to compute its behavior for acoustic transparency under pre-constrained configuration. It's characterized by its Young modulus, Poisson ratio, density. Its shape comes from the simulation, the abacus simulation, and obviously we do the same as before. We impose a diffuse sound field as an excitation, put finite elements for radiation, and compute acoustic transparency. So for example, the TL here, measurements and computation show relatively good agreement, knowing that the model of Actron is 2D. The remodel obviously is not 2D. So 3D effects are not taken into account in the Actron model. And other effects like material stiffening due to the pre-stress are not taken into account either. Geometrical stiffening due to pre-stress is taken into account, but the material itself can change because it's a large deformation rubber, and it the tangent modulus will change during deformation. We don't take that into account. For doing that, we should import the tangent stiffness from abacus. It's possible, but it's needs more exchange between codes. Okay, conclusions. I think I've said a lot about this. It's more about non-reflecting boundary condition we have in Actron. It's really needed as soon as you want to use finite elements in the context of far-field radiation. And far-field radiation is used extensively as soon as you want to model acoustic transparency and compute a TL. So they are a very common ingredient in modeling. Difficult for finite element, natural for boundary element. Difficult but not impossible. You have various ways to do that with infinite elements, PML, and discrete relay. And both of those methods works well and do not add so much additional CPU cost compared to closed cavity simulation. Okay. Now something much more related to what we have shown, what we have seen yesterday. Here it's the comparison between a full finite element modeling of trimmed components on a complex panel compared to a very simplified approach, which is exactly the approach that Noureddin have shown yesterday, where transfer matrix method is used for computing the behavior of the trim. We have used the simplest version of that, so not the one where we have cross nodes interaction, the local version, and we have used the zero wave number version, so normal incidence for the waves for computing this. As Noureddin has given a very nice introduction yesterday, I will be able to skip this very quickly. Maybe just highlight some difference we have. For the direct finite element model, we use some tricks to speed up the simulation, which is a little bit standard in the field. The trim is dealt separately from the cavities and the structural models, which are represented by their modes. The trim is not represented by modal representation because it's too damped. It's represented in the physical domain, but it's for each frequency, it's statically condensed on the boundary, on the nodes that will be in contact with the structure of the cavity, and projected in the structural modes and cavity modes. This gives a new modal contribution, coupling the cavity and the structure. So full coupling, so each mode is coupled with each other modes. So it adds CPU cost, but it's cheaper to do it like that than direct introduction usually. And this way, it's also very easy to replace such a finite element trim by a TMM version, because we just have to compute the same modal coupling matrix as what was done here. We have to do it for each frequency. It's cheap for TMM. It's less cheap for full finite element model, but we can use tricks like frequency interpolation to speed up things. Okay. For the trim modeling, I will skip that. You have seen that many times. For the direct formulation, I use Galerkin finite elements for UP probabilistic model, the one I've shown before. For the 1D trim, it's a typical transfer matrix method, except that we directly use the impedance, transfer impedance, transfer admittance for each layer instead of using the transfer matrix. Why? It's a little bit more complex because it's not matrix multiplication you have to use to combine the different layers. Instead, you have a static elimination of the internal flux variables, basically, and the main variables. So it's very similar to what you have when you do a static condensation of finite elements. That's why we do it. I have a lot of experience doing that. The other reason is that the matrix you end up with is itself a transfer matrix generalized, which relate main variables like displacement, pressure for fluids to what we call flux variables, so the one involved in the natural boundary condition like stresses, average velocity for fluids, acoustic velocity for fluids, stuff like that. And so once you have such a matrix, you can incorporate it in finite element model almost like if it was another finite element. It's very easy to do, very efficient, and allows very easily to move from analytical to finite element representation. It's also quite flexible in the term of coupling we can have between layers, and it's a little bit more computationally intensive, but more flexible than transfer matrix in our case. It's really another form of transfer matrix. It's really similar. Okay, for the comparison, we have done it in two steps. One first step on a 2D plate model. The advantage is that we can go to very high frequency because we are 2D with very fine mesh, so we can build a reference solution with full finite element model at a relatively cheap cost for large frequency band. Obviously, it's not representative of a complex 3D model, but for first estimation of the approach, it was a good first test. And this is what happened for different thickness of foams. You have the comparison between full finite element model and TMM matrix. So the full finite element model for different thickness is the solid line, dashed line, the TMM. You see that obviously the modes are well predicted because they are not coming from the treatment, they are coming from the plate itself, which is represented by finite element anyway. But the damping, which is really the effect and insulation, is not always well represented. It tends to be better for thicker foams. And why is that? It's because we have used a very simple TMM method, which take into account only normal behavior. And so anything related to side motion of the fluid or shearing of the porous material will not be captured by this simple 1D model. But when you have thick porous material, it can happen, at least when you go to higher frequency range, that you have so much pumping motion that most of the dissipation and insulation is there. You have, of course, you still have side motion of the fluid, but it's not the main dissipation mechanism. And in this case, the 1D model is not too bad, and that's what we observe. You have an illustration here, maybe a little bit for a specific frequency, low frequency, high frequency. And you see when I speak about thicker foam are easier, it's in terms of wavelength. So when you increase frequency, you tend to have more complex normal behavior within the foam. You have some kind of internal pumping in the porous material, which dissipate energies and isolate the top from the bottom. And the side behavior, tangential behavior, is less important. This tends to happen when you have at least one wavelength within the porous, the shorter wavelength within the porous, shorter than the thickness. And so at low frequency, we have very different behavior between the simplified model and the full model. At higher frequency, it gets better. Now, trying to do that on more complex application, this is the type of acoustic transparency we do all the time. It's a firewall with non-planar shapes, not rectangular with holes. Boundary conditions are simplified because it's to be tested within a TL test. It's not to be put in place on a car, but in principle it could be incorporated within a car, and then you will have like super element connection or stuff like that to represent the rest of the car connected to the side of the firewall. What is a little bit different from the previous case here also is that we don't have a single thickness for the porous material, but the thickness varies like this, where we have a thicker treatment in this side and thinner here. We have checked different foams which have very different characteristics. And again, we tested the very simplified 1D TMM model for the trim plus heavy layer compared to a full finite element model. And we have two frequencies of interest. The pumping frequency, where you will have some decoupling between the heavy layer and the bottom layer. Below that, it will behave more like a complex sandwich. Above that, you will have decoupling, and the treatment will really be very efficient for insulation. And you have the other frequency, which is this frequency at which you have one wavelength happening within the porous itself. And you see that indeed, usually, you have a behavior that is, it's not so bad, but it's far from perfect at low frequency, and above this pumping frequency, it's better. It's better, but when you continue to increase frequency, it's getting worse. And when we look at that, we found that basically the issue was not with the 1D TMM method, it was with finite elements. Just because for this 3D case, we were not able to use as many elements as we wish in the thickness direction. And because you have very short equivalent wavelength for heavily damped behavior in this direction, the finite element mesh was just not refined enough. And we show that when we checked the difference between linear model and quadratic model, which was much more costly. We have much better agreement between the quadratic model, which obviously is able to capture much more the shorter wavelength within the thickness with the TMM than the linear model that obviously has not mesh converged. This is typically what happened for industrial application. It's very seldom that we have full mesh convergence. People usually want to push to higher frequency than what they should be able to, and they hopefully are aware of that. And I think it's, in some cases, it's not a bad idea, because you still have tendencies, but you still obviously have to be careful about the trust you put there. You have to be aware that those results are maybe not as accurate as you wish. Yeah.
So
We just computed the pumping frequency for a spring mass system, with the heavy layer acting as a mass and the porous plus air spring acting as the spring.
okay, so you calculated it before. Okay, yeah, that's good.
Okay, this is about the same for different materials. I will not go into details. This is an example about the mesh that was used. As you see, it's different from the 2D due to complexity in geometry. We used an unstructured grid mesh, which converged slower than a regular hexahedral mesh. In this case, we could have used hexahedral mesh, but it's not always the case. Tetrahedron are very easily generated. Hexahedron, well, it's more tricky for meshes. So that explains also why we have a convergence issue for linear elements, and we should use quadratic elements, but as you see, this is the time per frequency. It's very quick when we don't have treatment. For linear finite element, it's okay. For quadratic finite elements, it's more. And for TMM, it's faster, but still we have additional cost compared to this, and this is due to some issues we have with the optimization in our code. So normally with a TMM, we should have an increase of CPU time because we have to reduce this, but not so much because of the pure 1D version of this. We should have no additional coupling between degrees of freedom compared to the no treatment. Okay. So, conclusion, the simplest 1D trim model, analytical trim, is working under certain circumstances. So you have to be careful, but it's not bad. It's very interesting in terms of performance. Obviously, it's the cheapest model we can imagine. The idea would be to go further using the technique that Noureddin has shown yesterday, so what I call 1.5D. But this is for later. We don't have that yet, and we'd like to investigate maybe alternatives based on homogenization IDs, so that we could represent multi-layers of porous material with a single layer of porous material. And this should help a lot in terms of CPU time, while probably having the same advantage in terms of meshing capabilities and taking into account the side wall effect as mesh. But we have to find a model that do that. There, okay. The other thing that we would like to do is, well, this 1D model is maybe very simple, but in fact, for complex excitation and complex geometry, it's often enough and probably within the variability envelope of experimental results, at least in some cases. So in itself, it's interesting. But we know that at low frequency, it's working much more poorly. And it's also at low frequency that we have a higher fidelity and less variability in the experimental results. So an idea would be to, for example, switch between finite element and 1D model automatically depending on frequency. Having a coarse mesh at low frequency, which can be done without using too much CPU, and having the 1D at higher frequency as an efficient approximated method. So that's something we would like to do also in the future. Okay, so I was a little bit quicker for this, so maybe I can speak about something a little bit different now. It's interesting to show how finite element method is flexible, not only in terms of geometry, boundary condition, but also in terms of quickly implementing a new ID based on new coupled PDE. As you see, the formulation for going from a PDE mathematical model to a finite element implementation, they are quite systematic and straightforward. So basically, when you have a code that allows you to reuse some bricks and do stuff easily, you can quickly implement a new PDE. Most of the difficulty involve implementing correct boundary condition, but the formulation of the element itself is simple as long as you use a simple Galerkin formulation. And so that was the idea behind what we have done here. We had an issue. We need sometimes to model an array of very thin ducts, which can be seen as a class of porous material, maybe the simplest one, because you have the expression of K and rho equivalent for regular ducts with geometrical cross sections that have been obtained analytically. It was shown by Luc and Fabien yesterday. So it's in fact a very simple porous medium, but one which is obviously anisotropic, because you have a propagation direction, and in the other direction you have no propagation at all. So you have to take into account anisotropy. If you cannot do that, the only solution is to mesh your ducts individually, and this can become very expensive if you have very thin ducts in a large amount. And this is what happened for typical duct arrays, like, where do we find this? For example, catalytic converters, like radiators, sometimes like particle filters that are what we call double duct array. I will come back. But those sets of regular grid of ducts happen in quite a few systems. So I will start with modeling strategies, how we will get this PDE, and then how we will implement and what are the big difference compared to classical equivalent fluids, even the anisotropic version of equivalent fluids. So duct arrays, the characteristics, they have a preferential direction, probably even a single direction for acoustic propagation. So it's a very strongly anisotropic behavior. No cross flow is usually a valid assumption, because even if the resistivity is not infinite in the transverse direction, it's huge compared to the viscous drag and thermal loss in the duct direction. Viscothermal dissipation is important, so that's what Luc has shown yesterday, and you have to take that into account. Here, a small illustration. Viscothermal, you have dissipation due to shear forces due to the no-slip boundary condition, and you have also dissipation due to thermal exchange between adiabatic pressure fluctuation within the core of the fluid and the walls that are assumed isothermal because they have much larger heat capacity. Something a little bit different than what has been shown yesterday, and that what is usually taken into account into porous material, is that mean flow can be present. Obviously, in catalytic converter, you have the exhaust gas that cross this array of ducts. You have a mean flow that can be sometimes important. It's not necessarily extremely quick, it's not Mach 1, but sound speed in the small ducts can be slow. So at low frequency, especially, can have mean flow and acoustic speed that is not so different. So maybe flow effect is important, at least in some frequency regime. One good news is that usually those array of ducts are very, very stiff. So assuming fixed skeleton and equivalent fluid is probably a good start. Now, here comes the difficulty. You have basically two types of array of ducts. One simple one we call the single duct array. It's a set of ducts that are all similar. When you have a mean flow acoustic propagation, it comes from one side, exits in the other side for all the ducts. And then basically we can use a homogenization procedure, exactly like what was done yesterday to get an equivalent fluid. Just be careful, use anisotropic properties to prevent any fluid motion in the side directions. So this is not extremely complex. The main complexity is if we want to take into account the mean flow effect. Now there is another type of duct array, we call the double duct array, that we encounter in diesel particle filters or sometimes in heat exchangers. And in this case, we don't have a single set of ducts. Well, the geometry of the ducts may be the same for all the ducts in the array, but some of the ducts are open on one side and some other ducts are open at the other side. And the flow is a little bit different than the first one. You have the fluid entering on one set of duct, crossing the porous wall and going to the other one. And if you have pressure fluctuation, those pressure fluctuation will have to cross this resistive fixed wall also and go to the other duct. So obviously, the obvious model would be to use a porous material to model the wall here, to use a fluid, possibly with viscothermal correction, to model the ducts and go with this. And indeed, that we can do that, but when you have thousands and thousands of ducts like this, you end up with a mesh that is just awful to do and costly to solve. So we would like to do homogenization, but obviously single fluid homogenization will not work in this case. We will have to consider at least two sets of ducts. One duct open on side 1, side A, and one set open on side 2, and couple them to take into account the crossing here that happened at the previous wall. So how we can do that? When you have this model, you can do this coupling and derive a transfer admittance a little bit more complex, but basically it's possible assuming plane waves, and as the ducts are very small, you can assume the plane waves there. And once you go to analytical approach, you can do that for all the parts of your exhaust line and do one-day plane wave approach everywhere, and you have another, what it's called TMM also, but TMM for ducts coupling, where you assume plane wave at least each coupling between components, and compute the transfer matrix of each component, one of them being the complex double duct array. It's possible, but it's extremely efficient. You have no mesh. It will solve this issue. This problem will be solved very quickly, because the only degrees of freedom will be the modes, amplitude, and phase at each connection between your subsystem, plus subsystem modeling. Can be done experimentally or with the analytical approach. But it's valid only when you have plane waves excitation at the connection. And if you use analytical representation for components, you need to have plane waves everywhere within the component. So frequency will be limited at the largest cross-section. As soon as you have non-plane waves, you will make errors, or you have to go to a higher order TMM where you consider non-plane wave duct modes, which is more difficult. Another strategy is to, the first one we have used, and that works, it's to use direct finite element modeling of everything, including the very thin ducts here, and get the material properties for the walls, the geometry, the cross-section area, and so on, and do a classic finite element simulation. Problem is that meshing is not trivial, and CPU cost is very large. Usually we speak about CPU cost because it's easy to compare methods. Meshing time is often even more a drawback in industrial context, because it's engineering time. It's not a CAD and you push the button to generate the mesh. This is much more complex, so it has to be done a little bit with not by hand for each set, but by extrusion and so on. So it takes time for the engineer to mesh correctly this such a system, and that's annoying. So it's probably accurate. Well, there is no assumptions made there, except that we need to use a finite element mesh fine enough, but it's costly. Another strategy, and that was done by people doing experimental validation for their model in the University of Kentucky, it's to use a transfer admittance method only for the problematic part here, the double duct array, and all the rest can be modeled using finite element, or in combination of finite element where the cross section is large, and TMM for ducts where the cross section is small. That's possible. Transfer admittance will be accurate because basically it's a one-to-one point connection, but it's limiting when you have another types of array which are not made of arrays of ducts but stacking of very thin layers, and that happens a lot in heat exchangers. So there you have point-to-point in one direction, but in the other direction it's not point-to-point, it's line-to-line in a way, and this makes things much more difficult. It's not a local admittance anymore. You don't have to measure the duct array, that's the big advantage, but the geometry of the duct array is, well, you will need to extract to compute the transfer admittance analytically here. So you will need to make some assumptions about ducts being straight, connection being flat, and stuff like that, else it will be more difficult. And then you will get a frequency-dependent transfer admittance that will need to incorporate in the finite element model. It's not an issue, but it's data to exchange. Okay, and then the last strategy, and the one that I will show more extensively here, is to use a homogenization technique. It's trivial for single duct arrays. Duct are, well, it's very similar to what was done for derivation of porous material with equivalent fluid approach. Gradient in the cross direction has to be neglected because there is no fluid motion. The resistivity is infinite in this direction. We need to include porosity, obviously, because the ducts are not the wall geometry. You have the walls also. Meshing is trivial because basically the mesh array, the duct array is meshed exactly like every other part, and you don't have elements to be fine enough to model the duct. They can be big in the cross direction. But, well, we have a solution for single duct array, not yet for double ducts. And that's what I will do now, how we can develop a homogeneous model for double ducts. Well, the idea was to combine the different ingredients we already had in our code. One of them is what we call the extended low frequency reduced model. It's basically very similar to what Luc has shown this morning about equivalent density and bulk modulus for ducts of known cross-section. But one of our students that did his thesis got his thesis 5 years ago extended this model to take into account the mean flow. And basically, that's how the equation, the partial derivation looks for this kind of model. You have something here that is very similar to what you had for this one, sorry, here for no flow case, but you have some kind of flow correction. Here, this is a simple correction to this term here, but sorry, here. So this is the flow correction term.
Gregor, could you use the pointer to show on the slide, please? Yes. Because we cannot see your mouse.
You cannot see the mouse. Okay. Okay, maybe I will use this pointer here. It will be easier because with this one, yeah, that's much better. So you have the mean flow correction term, which is here, and then you have a small correction, but that's not very important here. So those terms here and here were present already in the duct propagation model that Luc has shown yesterday morning. But those are extensions to take into account mean flow. It's a convective term that is added. It may or may not be important, usually depend on the ratio between mean flow and the speed of sound. So, but we can have that. The other ingredient for a single duct array is to say, okay, I don't want to model each duct independently. I can model the whole array of ducts, provided that I prevent any flow motion in the cross direction. And the idea how to do that would just to use a tensor instead of a scalar for the equivalent density here, so that we can have this property in the duct direction and 0 in the cross direction, so that those cross terms are removed. So that's very obvious, and this allows to use the XLRF for duct array, not single ducts, taking into account mean flow, usually mean flow and the direction where you have finite resistivity is the same, obviously. And you get your model that can represent, without mesh issues, arrays of single ducts. It's that. Okay, but for double ducts we have an issue. We still have to model the two arrays of ducts, but the idea is just to superpose the thing, telling, okay, you have fluid of type 1, which is included in arrays open on one side, on the duct open on one side, and the fluid of type 2 linked to ducts open on the other side. Just superpose them, telling there are enough ducts of both sides at each point of interest to say there is both fluids present simultaneously. This is typically a homogenization procedure. But the trick is to say, okay, those fluids are not independent. They are linked by a term here, where basically you have a volume or mass source of fluid 1 coming from fluid 2 and vice versa. And those are typically the job for a transfer admittance that will represent what happened at the porous walls. So it will say, okay, if I have a pressure difference between fluid 1 and fluid 2, it will induce a transfer of mass between fluid 1 and fluid 2. And this will couple the two equations. And that's what I have written here. You just have to write Q1 and Q2. So Q1 is what enter in fluid of type 1, Q2 what enter in fluid of type 2, linked to pressure in fluid type 1, pressure in fluid type 2, and you have a coupling here. You see that you have some gradient term here because the pressure is not exactly the psi variable when you have a mean flow. It's a little bit different. You have this convective term. And you also have here this expression here because the mean flow make the presence, the incoming mass flow rate take this form in the weak form. It's a little bit difficult to show, but it can be demonstrated.
So when I got it right, it is the case that I take into account a small porosity that the fluid goes through by the different pressures. So I don't characterize it by the pores themselves, but by measurement at them.
No.
Okay.
We could do it, and basically I will show a relation very quickly that allows to go from one description to the other. Because you have, with the thickness of the porous wall and some resistivity, we can deduce it. But at least for the University of Kentucky case, what they have used is some global measurement of pressure drops when you impose a pressure difference at the entrance and exit of the double duct array. See how much mass flow happen at low frequency. And that's what we have used because that's the only information we got. We have the other information was not even provided, but we retrieved it by the description of the material, was more or less the porosity. But we have very little information about the actual porous characteristics of the walls, and that's quite typical for porous materials. So yeah, we have more like a global description of the walls. But you can go from one to the other.
Okay. Thank you.
So numerical example, we made a comparison between, well, that's what I said. You know some volume fraction, wall porosity, it's not known. We have chosen 0.3 because for the corduroyed material, that's what we found in the literature. And we had some resistivity, and that was global resistivity, total resistivity. That's the only thing we know. And you have some relationships here that allows to go from one resistivity in the sense of porous material to this total resistivity, and also some relation that allows you to have a bulk modulus part for the transfer ratio, because if you have an increase of pressure on both sides, you will have no net mass flow from one fluid to the other, but you have flow going from the two types of fluid within the wall. And as the wall represents a significant part of the total fluid within the array for 0.3 porosity, wall porosity, and well, it was important to take that into account. You will see. So the physical model we used as a comparison, we had all the all the duct meshed, and I don't think you can see finite elements there because they are so fine that it looks like gray. But basically you have a lot of elements. And this is the homogenized model, much nicer for CPU time, but especially much nicer for the poor guy that has to mesh this. Comparison, time per frequency, well, it's very different, as you see. Now, comparison of the methods, you have a very good agreement between direct modeling, double fluid, and the one approach that was used at Kentucky University, where they used the transfer admittance method for this part. And it matched quite well everywhere, not always perfectly, because, well, it's the bulk modulus effect of the wall that is the main culprit, we think, because there is quite a high sensitivity to this effect, and we had not enough information to be sure about the porosity, about either we can choose adiabatic or isothermal condition for the air there, so it's not so easy. But basically all the models agree between each other, and they agree well with the experimental results, except for the transfer admittance method at a certain frequency, and that's because at some frequency you obviously have non-planar effects within the part here that was not taken into account by the transfer admittance effect. And from here you see that all the models are different from the experiment, and that's the reason why we have that, is that at this frequency you start to have non-planar modes in the small cross-section here, and unfortunately we had no information about how to excite our model, because only a planar mode excitation was measured in the experimental measure. So it really depends on what condition you had above to see what kind of modes you generate in those cross-section once they start to propagate, and we had not enough information to know that. We should push the model to include upstream conditions if you want to have better match at those frequencies or above. Okay. The influence of flow, that was quite interesting because we were not sure if it will play an important role or not. Apparently, it's not very important. You see that the effect cannot be seen on the curve, except if you zoom here at low frequency, at very low frequency, we have something strange. We don't know if it's the flow effect taken incorrectly into account, because we have some division by frequency, so we have issues. But what is interesting to see is that the frequency response for the experimental results shows the same type of behavior. Now, the issue for experimental results is also complicated for very low frequencies. So we are not sure here that it's a real phenomenon or if it's an experimental artifact. So, well, what happened here at low frequency or higher mean flow velocity should be investigated more, but maybe there is an effect, maybe not. It's not clear this time. Okay, so, well, this was a very specific development. I've shown it because it's related to equivalent fluid models for porous, like a next step where you use two fluids simultaneously to have like a double fluid homogenization. But I've shown that also because it shows how flexible the finite element technique is, not only in terms of geometry and boundary condition, but also in terms of modeling different type of physics. Once you build a PDE, usually it's not very difficult to incorporate it in the finite element model because the procedure is quite straightforward. Now you can have issues because you can have locking, numerical issues and stuff, but at least in the first step, it's quite easy to incorporate new physics. So I think that's conclude all my talk, and yes, thanks Mr. Hua from Kentucky, because he kindly provided all his experimental results, and it was not easy to find experimental results for this kind of things.